today. I'm just going to talk about in general about leadership development because I think that that's really important, and it's totally critical to the success of your organization, to building your organization. And then I'm going to do a little bit of talking about succession planning, and specifically, I'm going to show you some guides because I think guides are the most, documentation is like the most important thing. So I'm going to show you some of those, and I'll give you a couple of examples that you can check out yourself if you want. All right. So some of the things that we're going to talk about in this training, we'll talk a little bit about the difference between an activist and an organizer. So we're going to talk about the difference between an activist and organizer, and we are going to talk a little bit about leadership development, the art of the one-on-one, etc. It's going to be exciting. All right. So have you guys heard this distinction before, like between an activist and an organizer? Yes. No? Okay. So an activist is someone who shows up at the protest, right? And that's really, really awesome, right? Like that's super duper cool, right? You see it in an email or you see something on TikTok or on, your social media somewhere, and it tells you there's going to be a protest about, freeing Palestine tonight, and you decide to go out and go, right? That makes you an activist, and that's awesome. Sharing things on social media, that makes you an activist. That's super cool. However, what is really, really important for our movement and what we really need, right, is more organizers. Organizers are the people who decide the time and the place that the protest is happening. Organizers are the people who plan for the march. Organizers are the people who bring the bullhorns, right? Organizers are the people who actually make the event happen. And so, while it's great to recruit more activists to our cause, and there will always be people in your organizations who are just purely activists, right? They're willing to go along because they agree with the cause and everything. Nothing wrong with that. But there will also, the goal is to make as many people as possible in your organization into organizers themselves, right? People who are going to carry forward the work, people who are going to build power in your organization. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah, like thinking about the difference there, right? We want people who are actually going to arrange the, organize the campaign, not just people who are going to show up. And just so you don't think that I made fun of it, that's under activist, that's a stock photo of a not real activist. So I'm not making fun of them. But these are some real organizers, and I believe that they are protesting for a free Palestine. So that's awesome. All right. So call this the ladder of engagement, right? And that's really how we think about kind of moving people up into leadership positions, right? You want to start people at a kind of a point of contact that's comfortable for them, and but that is kind of exciting, right? So signing a petition is a great way to make contact with someone. Petitions in general are not a particularly effective tactic. A lot of people are not particularly pressured by petitions, right? But they're a great tactic for base building, right? So what I mean by that is that when we collect petitions, what we're doing is collecting info for people who we can follow up with later and develop into leaders in our organization. See, it all fits together. And so so you might want to start people with something like that. Starting people with attending an action is a great way to get them involved, particularly with like a student organization. People are going to be attracted to action, to people who are actually doing something, that kind of thing. Inviting people to come to a protest can be a really invigorating way of getting them involved. I ended up getting involved with this movement when I was, I think I told you I was working on my PhD, and in American Studies, and I ended up getting sick. And it was right around the same time that the Affordable Care Act fight was happening. And so there were a bunch of different progressive organizations that were suddenly working on healthcare. And so I started getting these emails from MoveOn.org of all people, of all organizations, telling me to come out and tell my story at an event, right? So that's how I ended up getting involved with activism. I had never done anything like this before, but all of a sudden I was standing there in front of a group of people and I'm telling my story, and I'm like, hey, this feels pretty powerful. All of a sudden, I do not feel terribly hopeless about our system. I feel kind of like maybe I could do something. I feel a little fired up, very energizing. After the point where you actually have someone sort of in your universe, right? You know, you've got their name and address, you've seen them around a couple times, etc. You know that they are, in general, a follower of the cause. Um, that's the point where you want to kind of pull them in more intentionally, right? And so move them up the ladder of engagement, as it were. A good, a good kind of next step, and really critical, would be like a one-to-one meeting with a current leader. That's very, very powerful, to have a kind of in-person meeting with someone who's a current leader, and someone who can say, hey, I see a lot of potential in you. How'd you like to get involved? You know, what are some of your skills that, you know, we can bring to bear here? So a one-to-one is really essential, and we'll talk a little bit more about one-to-ones. Have you talked about that at all in this internship yet? No? Oh, good. This is not old news. That's great. Um, So, once you got to the point where you kind of had a one-to-one with someone, been like, hey, you know, I've seen you around a lot recently. It's really cool. Tell me more about yourself and how you'd like to get involved, etc. At that point, you know, you might be like, you know, listen, based on our conversation, I think you would really, really like to join our direct action planning group, right? So why don't you come to one of our meetings where we're actually going to be planning the next action, right? Now, at this point, right, I've gotten some one-to-one attention. I've had the thrill of taking action for the first time, and now I'm like, oh shit, I can actually like be part of making this happen. This is awesome. So then after that, I might go to this planning meeting. I might, in the middle of the planning meeting, decide, you know what, I can make the flyer for this action. I can actually, you know, do the sound system for this action. I can take on a task. Now I've taken on a task. And when I have taken on a task and succeeded, I am going to be unstoppable, right? Because I suddenly have this idea that there is a bigger thing going on, right? But that I, as an individual, have a place to play, have a role to play in it. And that's going to give me some confidence. And as people build their confidence in the work, that's the time to bump them up into further leadership roles, right? So maybe after I've executed that task, you know, successfully, maybe the next meeting, you're going to ask me to actually lead the meeting for the working group, right? And I'll, you know, start to feel some expertise. I'll feel really confident. I'll lead that meeting. I want to say that every time I do something, it's something that you don't have to do. Have you noticed that, right? So every time that I take on a task, every time I lead a meeting, moving up, every time I plan an action, that is something that you, Danielle, do not have to do. Right. So this is how we build our capacity in our organizations, right? By building people up to the point where they're leaders, so that now we're sharing the work, right, amongst all these different leaders and organizers, as opposed to just dictating to a group of our base. You feel that? Is that good? Yeah, you like that? Do you hate it? Okay. If you hate it, speak up because we should have a deeper talk. All right. So, again, when someone has actually taken on some tasks and actually done a really good job of them, you might want to think about putting them into the permanent leadership structure of your organization. Again, with a student organization, I know nothing is ever quite permanent, but you want to put them actually into the leadership structure, right? So maybe they become the head of the direct action committee, right? And then finally, you know, joining official leadership, right? You're working with this freshman who has been, or sorry, first year, sorry, medical school, right? You're working with a first year who has been like really awesome and really active and seems to be really excited about the group, right? Yeah, you know, maybe you, by the end of the year, you're like, hey, bud, you should totally run for president of Snap next year or something like that, right? Again, getting people into those official leadership channels is great. The best kind of leaders for an organization are people who have done all of these things before. Um, and by that, I mean people who have actually worked in the trenches, who have come in as activists, who have, done the little things and then have moved on to take on tasks and head up a committee, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry, my cat is like gnawing at me right now. Uh, all of those things, those make the best leaders, right? A lot of times leaders will parachute in from outside, right? Having no experience on the ground, and that is not useful for anyone. All right. Um, so does everyone get that idea of the ladder of engagement, right? We're constantly moving people up. Oh my God, Fanny, what is wrong with you? All right. So key part in this process is one-to-ones, and this is something that you want to do at the start, right? So it's something that you want to do when people first get involved as soon as possible. And you also want to continue to do it throughout the process, right? Again, remember back to Cesar Chavez's definition of organizing, right? It's one conversation, then another conversation, then another conversation. And one-to-ones are what many of those conversations look like. So one-to-one is a term that you will hear if you stick around in movement building spaces, because we talk about it all the time. So the purpose of the one-to-one is to build a relationship and bring activists into your work, right? It's about and I want to just emphasize that it's about both those things, right? You're not just actually asking someone to do something. That's not really a one-to-one conversation. That's a request. You are also building your relationship at the same time, right? Okay. This is an intentional conversation, and you are to be clear about the intention from the beginning, and that goes in a couple of different directions. But one of them is just that, like in the post, because we have a sexually charged society, it can be really creepy if you just ask someone to come to a bar with you and don't tell them why, right? And so it's really important to be like, hey, I'd like to speak to you about the work. I'd like for us to talk a little bit about the organizing, that kind of thing, right? So that people don't misunderstand it as some kind of a sexual advance or something like that. That happens a lot. Again, we live in a sexually charged society. Okay. The other thing is that you don't want to sort of trick someone into having this conversation. So you don't want to be like, yeah, come and have a few drinks with me. We'll have a few laughs. And then when they get there, like ambush them and be like, all right, I want to have a conversation about your deepest values. And also I want to tell you how to get involved with my organization, right? Like that's not fair to them. So you want to be really intentional from the beginning, talk about why you're actually trying to connect with someone, and stick to that. Next, you want to make sure that you're doing some active listening. Yeah, just like my cat Fanny is doing right now. Active listening. One of the things that we always say down south, they say, God gave you two ears and one mouth so that you could listen twice as much as you talk. Now, whether it's God that gave you those ears and that mouth, or Marx, or science, doesn't really matter. The point is it's a good reminder that you should be doing more listening than you're doing talking, right? Make sure that you're engaging people and make sure you're asking questions, right? Go deep. Um, you want to know about people's background. You want to know about what motivates people, right? Like why do they bother to get involved with this, right? Um, and you'll find that people have kind of usually some kind of deep trauma that motivates them, right? Like people who are okay in our society don't bother trying to make change, right? People who have ever always gotten all the things that they wanted, people who are totally normal, people who fit in, people who are comfortable, right? Don't want to make change. So this can be a conversation where you're going to find out some really interesting and deep things about people. You want to identify skills that they already have or want to develop, right? So, I mean, generally in the conversation, in course of conversation with people, they'll mention some of the things that they're good at. And also, listen out not just for the things that people are saying they're good at, but for the things that people are saying they're interested in, right? Danielle, I'm sorry, Danielle, you're like the first picture on my screen, so you're my example for everything. So like, um, yeah, so like, Danielle, if we're having a conversation and you're like, yeah, like I've never done like, sound editing, but that would be really cool or whatever. Maybe let's work on it and let's do sound editing for our podcast together, right? Like let's develop that skill. And that way you're not just offering someone a chance to get involved and actually, kind of be part of the political movement. You're actually also offering people a site for personal development, a place where they can personally grow as well. And people dig that. All right. Suggest ways to get involved and follow up, right? You've kind of set it up, you've queued it up with this amazing conversation. You're talking to people about what are the things that motivate them. You're talking to people about what things they want to do, their dreams, etc. Right? You want to funnel that great conversation into let's suggest some ways that we can get involved. Let's do some next steps and then let's follow up on those, right? So, oh my God, I really love your ideas about, I really love your ideas about, how we can improve our website. Why don't you come to the next meeting where we're talking about how we're redesigning our website, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So that is a one-to-one. I would say generally a one-to-one takes about an hour to do, a good one. So, you gotta stop biting me. A good one takes about an hour to do. And so you want to set aside time for that again. And again, be intentional about it. Be like, hey, I was wondering if we could sit down for an hour and talk. Some people, by the way, to get back to the one-to-one, some people will have something like an orientation coordinator or a welcoming coordinator whose job is just to actually sit there, find contact information of new people who are getting involved, and to do one-to-ones with them and to get them involved with whatever working group or committee that they might be interested in. And that can be a really, really useful role. Something you might not think of, right? You got like a president, a vice president, or whatever. A welcoming coordinator can certainly help you with making sure that when new people come in, they're not just floundering, they are actually being funneled into a leadership structure. So, um, all right. What actually develops leaders, right? You're going to give people tasks, you're going to get them to do them, right? But what actually makes people into better leaders? So taking on responsibility, right? Having everyone depend on you for something and coming through is like actually a big experience of leadership, right? That's really important, and that can change the way that people see themselves. Taking on a challenge, right? If Danielle agrees to try to learn audio editing so that we can work on the podcast together. By the way, I am the co-host of the Medicare for All podcast. I would strongly recommend listening to us on your favorite podcast platform. But if you want to take on that challenge and you complete it, it's awesome, right? You're going to feel really good about yourself. um Having a say in planning and decision making, right? So like feeling like I actually have something to say that matters. This goes a little bit back to our scarf from yesterday, remember? This idea that people need to feel like they have some kind of autonomy. Feeling recognized for positive contributions to the group, right? Goes back to our conversation about celebration, joy, and appreciation yesterday, right? Making sure that every time someone succeeds at a task, whether it's small or large, that we're calling it out for the group and being excited for them. Recruiting new members helps to develop leaders, right? If I'm actually seeing myself as someone who's growing our organization, then that gives me a different conception of myself as a kind of actor, as a main character, which is cool. And then finally taking on a public role, right? If you're talking to the reporter or something like that, you're going to feel like you're definitely like a real you're like a real leader in the movement. All right. So that's some very, all right, sweetie. That is some very kind of a brief introduction to developing leadership. So when I came into my position, I inherited this. It is the executive director guide. I'm not going to share this one with you because it has a lot of information about how we do our finances, but so this basically my predecessor sat down and over the course of several months, he wrote down everything that he did and he put it into this guide, and it goes through everything that I need to know. He was kind enough to put little headings in it so I can jump to things, right? So like for example, paying payroll taxes, that feels important, I should know about that, right? um, this guide has been completely indispensable to me, right? Like I open this at least once a day, usually twice, right? It just is a great place where everything is aggregated, right? Now, you might not want to share all of that in with all of your people. So it's good to create guides for both individual tasks and also individual teams. So let me show you what I mean. Are you all seeing telling your story team guide? Yep. All right. So one of our projects at Healthcare Now is we are strongly committed to a theory of change that's about storytelling, right? We want people to get up and tell their stories about their healthcare issues, whether they're patients or providers, and to talk about, what this healthcare system is doing. We want to emphasize, the terrible, devastating, real impact, right, of what the healthcare system does. So we have a project called Voices of US Healthcare where we actually record people's stories. And sort of the lead up to that is that we do a lot of telling your story trainings where we teach people how to tell their stories. Now, we have a team of volunteers and also some staff, right, who work on this team. This is basically everything that anyone who is on this team would need to know. Again, headings so they can jump to their thing or whatever. It gives a vision and mission statement, right? Why are we actually asking you to do the thing that we are asking you to do, right? Making it very clear. Roles and responsibilities. So we go through exactly who are the members of this team, right? There'll be trainers. Those are the people who are actually going to teach the class on how to tell your story. Facilitators, they're people who might handle breakout groups in the training. Coordinators, those are the people who deal with the people who take our training and follow up afterwards, right? And then interviewers, and basically those people take people who have taken the training and they sit down with them and they record their story with them, right? So it's pretty clear, right, who the members of the team are, right, what they're actually doing. It goes through workflow, right? So it talks a little bit about who does what when. There are even some little some little graphics here about the flow of information and decision making. Some team norms for our team, right? So again, like those community agreements that we have at live events, we have this for our teams. And you can see that it has like some really practical stuff, right? So if you're unable to complete an assigned task, right, you just let us know, right? And if you are late, you post a short apology in the Slack channel, right? So here's the norms. There are consequences if you violate the norms. They're very much proportionate to your violation of the norms, right? And so you're going to apologize if you're late on your assignment. Handing off completed tasks, being respectful, and also always giving your own input to help make the team better. So then we have a series of quick links that are things that that would be useful to people who are on the team, and then finally we follow it all up with a contact information for the actual people who are involved. All right, and then we can extend this like kind of documentation and guide writing all the way down to individual tasks, right? So this is for our board. Um, in particular, when you have a lot of people who are working as volunteers, breaking things down into specific tasks can actually help them to kind of see their way to actually accomplishing their goals, right? And so with our board, right, if I give them a list of a million things to do, they're going to freak, right? They're going to be like, oh God, I don't know if I have time for this. If I give them a one-page guide on how to create a social media fundraiser, totally doable, totally manageable. And so you can see that this one just links to, this one actually goes through step by step, right? What you click on and when. Sometimes when we do these guides, they actually have screenshots in them. And then it has some links to some outside resources like Instagram and Facebook's guides to setting up fundraisers. Um, there are some suggestions about best practices in here as well, right? So how to add a pic, right? Add a compelling pic. And if you don't have one, you can use this picture of a rally, because we know that that's motivating to people. Make an initial donation. This is also true, by the way, if you're ever trying to raise money. Uh, if you make an initial donation, it actually really helps to get the ball rolling. Right, and then we have some information about getting the word out. Again, some screenshots, so that people understand their post or whatever, and then some alternates for people who are uh, who may not have social media. Uh, again, this is like kind of boring, right? And it might sound kind of intuitive, but groups don't do this. Like universally, this is the thing that I see groups failing to do. And when that happens, it can be a disaster, right? My first time as an executive director was, I guess, about 10 years ago. And the guy, I was a co-director with another woman. We were replacing an older white dude who had been there for 20 years, and he had written nothing down, right? So, I mean, we were basically just coming into this, like, 20-year-old organization. And it was like it was started, it might as well have been started yesterday for us, right? So things like you want to keep track of how to do tasks. You want to keep track of responsibilities and roles, responsibilities that are connected to different roles, right? The president actually always files the form with the university that gets us the funding that we need for pizza or whatever, right? Um, and you want to make sure to document your decision making process, all of that stuff. You're going to work on these things, on developing the structure, so just don't let it disappear. Keep it in a Google Drive or in a Dropbox or something like that, or whatever your university equivalent of that is. Just keep all this information together, make sure everyone has access to it. And if you're doing for example, like a team guide, make sure everyone on the team has access to edit so that they can update as the technology might change that they're using, the platforms might change, or the task itself, might change as people figure out better ways to do it. Does that make sense to folks? Yeah. Um, these are kind of my messages to you, right? Do a good job building a structure, guide people through the structure, and then leave documentation of the structure when you're done. And if you do these things, you will succeed, my friends. You will succeed.